There was a packed agenda for Thursday, December 12th sitting of the National Assembly. A number of government bills were resubmitted, and and one, I think, read for the first time. This is Political Scope, and I'm joined by the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, Mr. Anil Nandlal. And we will chat a little bit about what took place in Parliament and the kind of measures or things that will be needed to move forward on these very important pieces of legislation. Welcome to Political Scope, sir.
Thank you very much, Janelle. Um, the four bills were laid in the National Assembly and read for the first time. Those four bills included three, of which were voted down by the joint opposition in the National Assembly when they were tabled earlier this year by Home Affairs Minister Clement Rohi. One of them was tabled by me actually, and that is the anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism bill. And two others were tabled by Minister Rohi. Those three bills were all voted down. The opposition, on different occasions and for different reasons, have called upon the government to retable those bills. We have done so. There is a bill which I tabled for the first time, the Summary Jurisdiction Amendment Procedure Bill, and that is a bill that deals with the payment of traffic tickets issued.
Okay.
The current position is that if you are issued with a traffic ticket by a policeman, you are required to pay that ticket in the district in which it was issued. This bill attempts to change the law to make a traffic ticket payable in any district in the country.
Okay.
So in terms of the bills, that those bills were read a first time and will be read a second time at the next sitting of Parliament, hopefully. What is significant is that three of those bills, having been voted down, were allowed to be reread and retabled without any objection or without a motion being put to have that done, as is required by the standing orders in the views of many people. But we are fortunate that no technical objections were raised. The opposition did not oppose them, because had they opposed the procedure employed, and if they did not support the retabling of the bill, then they could not have been retabled. So this juncture, I want to give the opposition credit for being, I suppose, magnanimous in the circumstances, and finally listening to the pleas which have been made by various sectors of our country that these bills are important and they need to be passed expeditiously. So the opposition, I believe, should be credited for facilitating the retabling of these three bills which were previously rejected.
Should we take the the position of you putting forward these bills and these bills now going in your name, the ones that were once in Minister Rohi's name? Could we take that to mean that the government would be doing that in the future to avoid any sort of standstill? Because the opposition did say that they weren't going to support anything that was coming in Minister Rohi's name.
I don't want to say that it is a policy that the government will pursue in the future, but these bills are so important that Minister Rohi himself requested that I retable the bills on behalf of the government because he doesn't want to be the reason why the government's business is being stalled or delayed or frustrated. And therefore, Minister Rohi also should be given credit for the selfless position which he has taken, and which has allowed the bills to go forth.
Yeah. All right. A number of things also happened in addition to that. And we've seen certain things being put forward and certain things being voted down. And these had to do with the funds that were already approved for, at least the government already allocated funds to NCN and GINA. And those weren't approved by the House. As well as that for the Chedjagan International Airport and so on. Let's talk about that. How does government move on with
Well, it is important that the people out there understand what transpired. There were two sets of financial papers which were presented by the Honorable Minister of Finance, Dr. Ashni Singh. One set of financial papers was a statement or statements of excesses. And the other set of financial papers were applications for supplementary provisions. The Constitution of our country, which is the supreme law, allows for monies to be accessed in the Parliament in a variety of ways. One, you can do so at the beginning of the financial year and by the presentation of what is called a national budget, which is accompanied by an appropriation act. And that is the main method by which the government obtains money to spend, because the law requires that monies must be obtained in a particular way. The Minister of Finance is not empowered to just take money and spend. He has to comply with the law, and Parliament has a role to play in approving these monies which are required to be spent. So the major mechanism which is employed is the budget mechanism, which occurs at the beginning or close to the beginning of every year. Now, a budget is simply a budget. It's an estimation of what is to be spent.
Yeah.
Now, there are certain there are many occasions which will arise which will prove that what has been budgeted is insufficient. Therefore, what do you do in such a situation? The Constitution of our country provides two additional mechanisms. That is, after the Appropriation Act, for the Minister of Finance to access monies from the Treasury. Firstly, the Minister of Finance can, when he forms the opinion that there has been an insufficient money budgeted, or for whatever reason the monies budgeted were spent out and the need still exists for additional monies to be spent on any given matter, he can do one of two things. One, he can go to the National Assembly with a supplementary application requisitioning the Parliament's approval for a given sum of money for a stated purpose. That's the first mechanism. The second mechanism, the Constitution expressly allows him to, in those very circumstances, to expend monies and then as soon as is reasonably possible thereafter, present to the Parliament a statement of excesses showing the monies which have been spent and the purpose for which they have been spent, and seeking what would then be the ex post facto approval of the National Assembly.
Are there conditions that allow the latter to happen though, or
Of course, the Constitution, Article 318, speaks specifically and expressly and elaborately on the two processes
Okay.
which I have just adumbrated.
Okay.
My interpretation of Article 318 and the minister's interpretation of Article 318 of the Constitution accord with the interpretation of that article done by the Honorable Chief Justice of the country in the budget cut case in his preliminary ruling. Recall he handed down an 18-page ruling in which he detailed a whole host, he addressed a whole host of legal issues and detailed his opinion in the form of a ruling on those issues. Many of those issues involved and included an interpretation of various provisions of the Constitution. And Article 318 fell to be interpreted by the Honorable Chief Justice in his analysis. And his interpretation of the Constitution is consistent with my interpretation of the Constitution and Dr. Ashley Singh's interpretation of the Constitution. So the government feels confident that the Constitution allows for these two mechanisms to be used. What we saw last night is a use of both of those mechanisms.
okay.
Monies which were unlawfully and unconstitutionally cut out of the budget, as per the ruling of the Chief Justice, were restored
Okay.
and were spent. And last night saw a statement of excesses being presented by the Honorable Finance Minister in compliance with the constitutional condition in the form of Article 318A. And we saw another set of financial papers presented which dealt with applications for additional sums of money. The difference is in that set of financial papers, prior approval of the National Assembly was being sought.
Yeah.
So that is the distinction which must be appreciated by the populace. And anyone can look at Article 318 of the Constitution. It is written in very simple, clear English language, and therefore can be interpreted by anyone, and in fact has been interpreted by our courts.
So based on that, there is no place then for the opposition to take action against the Minister of Finance as they have suggested.
Well, I suppose they can attempt to initiate proceedings.
Considering that they have the majority, is it possible, or is there an arbiter that can
Well, that's what I'm saying. They can attempt to initiate whatever proceedings they feel may be appropriate. In my humble view and in my considered opinion, any proceedings initiated to, in any form or fashion, reprimand the minister for this would, in my view, be unsuccessful because the minister acted in compliance with and in accordance with the express language, mandate, and direction
Plus history
of the
would
Constitution.
Show. History would show, because there are times in the 9th and 8th Parliament when this would have been done without the opposition saying anything about it.
It would have been done before in this
Yeah.
very Parliament.
Yeah.
In this very Parliament. This 10th Parliament. It was done in 2012 when, recall in 2012, there were budget cuts also. The same constitutional conduit was used, and the finance minister utilized the very mechanism and restored the monies which were cut and presented the same financial statement of excesses to the parliament as is required of him by Article 318 of the Constitution of
So if
Ghana.
there's no, if there is no approval, but the monies have already been spent, what happens at the end of the year in terms of balancing off?
They will
on the
have some type of impact on the financial record, the financial accounting record of the country. And those who are trained in that area will have to deal with that. But speaking as Attorney General and as a lawyer, legally, the minister acted in compliance with the Constitution of Guyana and lawfully.
All right. The cricket bill, what happened with the cricket bill last evening?
Well, the cricket bill was supposed to have been, it is there to be, you recall that it went to a select committee and it came out.
Yeah.
So it is basically for third reading, for adoption of the report of the select committee and
third
for
reading and
third
pass.
reading. The opposition has expressed the view that someone complained to them that the minutes or the report which was prepared by the select committee was somehow inaccurate.
Okay.
So, and then some members of the opposition even were arguing that the bill should go back to the select committee because certain people out there are raising certain objections to provisions in the bill. Now, we went through a whole process in the select committee where we invited all the stakeholders on more than one occasions and have them ventilate their views fully. And we took everything into account. And everything that was done in that select committee was consensually done. The select committee had persons from the APNU and had Mr. Ramjatan from the AFC and persons from the government. And it was chaired by the minister. And every single decision which was made in that committee was consensually made. So when the bill came out and is supposed to be passed through the parliament now, we on the government side are shocked that there can now be a questioning of what transpired. And of course, persons out there who have a stake in this matter also voiced their concerns at the delay in the bill not being passed and what appears to be the ambivalence among the opposition in relation to a bill that was consensually produced by a select committee, of which they were part, of course. So a petition was presented, signed by some 3,800 persons right across the length and breadth of this country. And that petition simply called for the bill to be passed quickly. The opposition opposed the petition and voted it down. They cited as their reason for so doing that this petition used inflammatory and inappropriate language in the way it expressed what its concerns were. The government, through our Member of Parliament, Mr. Odinga Lumumba, presented the petition.
Okay.
And the opposition, they attempted first to prevent it from even being presented.
This is the second time this has happened in very recent times, though.
Yes. They, like the first time, they prevented it from being presented, and then they eventually voted it down. What is significant, and I'm happy that you recited or you referred to the other incident, and in that instance it was the Private Sector Commission, which, controls a large segment of our business community and directly or indirectly employs hundreds of thousands of Guyanese through their different constituent organizations. So that when these organizations speak, they speak on behalf of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Guyanese. This petition in relation to the cricket bill was actually signed by 3,800 and more persons. Now, recall historically, politically, and constitutionally, a parliament is a forum that must at all times deal with the people's business and advance the people's welfare. Parliamentarians have a singular mandate. That is to do the people's business in there. They are sitting there at the people's expense and at the people's pleasure. It is indeed a tragic day for democracy when the people who are put in the parliament shut out the voice of the people who have put them in parliament. I say that to make the emphatic point that many, I know, having looked at the signatures, hundreds of those people came from places like Region 10, etc., where the opposition would have received a lot of votes. So there were people in there who actually would have voted for the opposition. And here it is. They are signing a document, not somebody signing on their behalf. They have actually signed a document telling their leaders and their representatives in the parliament, we want this bill to be passed quickly. And those very leaders turn around and say, no, we are not going to hear you. Now that is an attack on democracy, and it is a dangerous movement towards authoritarianism, which we must take seriously and take sufficient measures as a people to guard against the further development of that kind of tendency. Because history will show that these authoritarian tendencies begin on a small scale and then they advance in greater proportion. So that is an unfortunate and a bad omen. An unfortunate thing and a bad omen. And I hope that those petitioners will take appropriate actions against those parliamentary representatives who rejected their voices in the parliament. So by and large, that I believe, everything that I have said would have dealt with the major matters dealt with
Thursday
by the
sitting.
parliament.
And we look forward to next Thursday for the next sitting of Parliament when some of these will be read for the second time. And
Yeah, the bills which I outlined will be read for the second time, along with there is an important bill also, the procurement amendment
Yeah.
bill, that will also be read for the second time. And you know, there is a connection between that bill and the establishment of
Public
the
Procurement
Procurement Commission. The government has stated its position, and I hope the opposition will accept that the government position is quite reasonable and appropriate.
all right, great. Thank you very much for joining me. in
You're
Political Scope.
welcome.
This has been the Political Scope. I'm Janelle Prasad. Goodbye.